Chief Jones, I want to start with you, and I'll just say briefly, this was a horrific event. I think we've all said that. This was the epitome. If you had a definition of school to prison pipeline, you could slot in this 51-minute video. And you mentioned that it was a very long, I think you said it was a very long video to review. Imagine how long it was for this little boy, for this 5-year-old, for whom nearly an hour was yelled at, and every single adult he interacted with, teachers, administrators, law enforcement, failed him, every system, for an hour. And we all know when you're younger how much longer time feels as you get older. 51 minutes of this, so it is a very long time. But I think we need to really focus on. There's been a lot said about, well, there's a lot of video and this was long and it's hard and I didn't know. We need to think about how long it was for this child. And so we're here today to try to get some measure of answers and accountability to find out what happened, why it happened, what policies we can change to make sure it never happens again, realizing how horrific this is, and change those things going forward. I think we realize it's already been elicited that we have state law that will be changing shortly, but that gets in the way of that transparency and accountability, in light of the fact that we've already seen the video. So we're hopeful that will be removed, because you can't have trust without transparency. You can't have accountability without transparency. So Chief, I'm going to ask you a few questions in succession, and I would just ask that you do your best. I'll do my best to phrase them in such a way that they require, in my view, a yes or no answer, a very short answer. And I would ask that you just work with me, because I have limited time, to try to respond in that way, if you could, please, sir. In your opening remarks, you said that as chief of police, as a father, as a 35-year veteran of the police department here in Montgomery County, and I don't want to incorrect you state what you said, but I think you said you were dismayed, or you were very disheartened, used some adjective, by the actions of these officers. Is that a fair characterization of what you said at the beginning?
To some degree, yes.
Okay. And I assume that means, in both your personal and professional opinion, since you mentioned those three roles, father, chief of police, veteran of the force, that was both a personal and professional opinion.
That's correct.
Okay. So these next set of these questions, I want to ask your personal opinion. I'm not asking what you did or didn't do in your official capacity. I'm asking your personal opinion. In your personal opinion, were the officers acting in this video in accordance with police training and policy?
Mr. Jawando, I can't answer that question.
Okay.
Due to the pending litigation.
Okay. In your personal opinion, were the officers on camera representative of the police department as a whole?
Mr. Jawando, I can't answer that question due to pending litigation.
Okay. In your personal opinion, is there any reason that any adult, let's set this situation aside, any adult should scream at the top of their lungs inches from a child's face for any reason?
No.
No. In your personal opinion, is referring to any child, in particular a Black child or brown child, as a beast an appropriate way to speak to a child?
Mr. Jawando, I'm not going to answer the question because it still goes to this particular situation. And as much as I would like to present my personal opinion, I am here representing the chief as chief of police of Montgomery County Police. That's my role. And so with all due respect, I would just ask you to keep that in mind.
Well, I understand. I understand
that there is pending litigation. And if I could have that discussion another day, I would. But at this point in time, I can't make that statement.
Okay. So you would agree that adults shouldn't threaten or scream at any child?
I would agree with that, yes.
You would agree with that. Okay. And since state law prohibits you from commenting on what actions, if any, were taken, well, let's just start with that. You did say that there was a disciplinary procedure and action was taken against both officers. Is that correct?
That is correct.
and I know you can't, according to state law that hopefully will be changed soon. I think it's important for residents to know that there should be no state law that prohibits the disclosure of how people charged to protect and serve us are disciplined when they don't do that. But that aside, should anyone who has done this activity, any of these activities in any situation that you just stated that you said should never happen, screaming at a child, yelling at them, should they have the honor of serving as police officers?
I can't answer that question.
If so, LEOBRA is keeping you from, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, keeping you from answering those questions. Do you support the repeal of this law that does not allow you to answer these questions?
No, I don't support the entire repeal of the LEOBR. No.
What about provisions that would allow you to answer the questions I've asked you directly and others have asked?
If there's questions about whether or not I could speak to the discipline of our officers, I've stated this before in public that I think that police chiefs should have the ability to talk about the discipline of their officers for transparency and accountability. Okay. I've made that statement in the past.
And the discipline that was doled out, again, I know you can't say specifically what happened. In this case, you deem to be appropriate under the circumstances?
I believe it to be fair and just under the circumstances, yes.
Well, it's tough for me to understand that in light of what we saw and what you've just stated. They seem to be contradictory.
Well, I don't think it was contradictory to the first statement that I made to Mr. President Hooker as we look at what we talked about, fair and just treatment of all officers on this police department.
Right. Well, I understand that. I was going to ask you about that. It seemed to be that you suggested that in light of a good goal, I would also say to have fair and just discipline for all officers, regardless of their race or gender or sexual orientation or gender identity or religion, any part of their demographic background, that you see this incident or this case or this set of disciplinary decisions in the context of these officers being Black. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, please don't. And I appreciate that, because that's not the way that I view this. It has nothing to do about the discipline for these particular officers who were not done based upon their race.
So then what did you mean by that statement, that you're sensitive to Black officers when you came on the force having disparate discipline? I want to understand what you meant when you said that then.
Well, I think it's the goal, Mr. Jawando, that I always hear you speak about people of color being treated in a fair and just system. And so the fact that these officers are of color, but they're still going to be treated in a fair and just system. And so when we look at that in the history of this department and how people have been treated, again, in a fair and just system, that is what I am going to maintain.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't disagree with you at all. You're right. I do think everyone should be treated fairly and equally. I just think if we are saying that an officer, and I'll say it's my opinion, I've said this publicly, anyone that handcuffs a child, calls them a beast, screams in their face, several of these things you said should never happen to any child, that person or persons, regardless of their race or ethnicity or any other factor, they do not deserve the honor of protecting and serving the residents of Montgomery County. That's my opinion. And I know that's not something.
That's understood.
And last thing I'll ask you, sir, is when were you made aware of the incident again? And when did you request the footage? That was asked, but I didn't understand it. It happened January 2020. When did you see the footage for the first time?
I saw the footage later in the year when it was time for me to review the investigation, which was probably around December.
So almost a year had gone by.
Almost, yes.
And no one prior to that point had flagged for you, hey, this is something that was pretty horrific. You heard Dr. Smith talk about the rarity of a student walking out of the building. I would hope it's a rare occurrence that a 5-year-old is handcuffed, and what we saw happened. No one flagged it for you saying, hey, you might want to look at this before then.
No, I was made aware of the incident, but the entire video had not been reviewed. The point you're making about the handcuffing of the child, all of those things came to light later. But again,
Okay.
as I noted, as it relates to how I go about making a determination once I hear the whole story, putting the video together with the story to make a decision in response to discipline.
Okay. And I just have two questions for Dr. Smith, and then I'll yield, Mr. President. Thank you. Dr. Smith, you said that I appreciated your opening statement about how this made you feel. I've still yet to watch it continuously because of just how hard it is to watch. I have to break it up in pieces. Isn't it currently prohibited in the MOU that MCPD and MCPS has to not have police officers involved in student discipline?
Yes.
So then any situation in which an officer was involved in student discipline, that would be a violation of current MCPS policy in light of that MOU.
It's currently in the MOU that police officers are not involved in discipline. That's a fact.
Okay. All right. And then my last question, has any mental health or social emotional support been offered to this child or this family in light of the trauma that was inflicted?
I cannot answer specifically because of the ongoing litigation and because of FERPA. What I can tell you is generally in situations in the school system when there is known trauma, we do reach out in a variety of different ways with the family and the student involved in the situation. In general, that happens on a consistent and regular basis.
Okay. And are you relieved of any abilities? This is my last question. Are you relieved of your ability to answer any of these questions about specifically what happened in the actions you took, Dr. Smith, to either investigate or take any action in regards to employees that you have in regards to this situation?
So I can't speak about anything specific. What I can tell you is the incident occurred in January of 2020. We became at MCPS, the Board of Education and I, and the leadership became aware of it in January of 2021. We began an investigation at that time. And then when we received the video footage on March 26, 2021, we began to re-examine what we knew based on being provided the video footage.
All right. Well, this system's obviously broken in that you didn't find out for a year and didn't see the footage until the day we saw it. We got to fix all of that. And I agree with my colleagues' statements on that, and we will do that work. Thank you, Mr. President.